Warning, this episode contains mentions of animal attacks. Please listen with care. One spring afternoon in southern New Jersey, a group of girls were tending sheep near the edge of a forest. It should have been quiet, but the animals started acting strange. The dogs began to growl, and when they looked up, they saw a figure watching them. Not quite human, not quite animal. And before the day was over, that encounter would turn into something much more. But in this part of the country, there's a place people don't talk about lightly. A stretch of land where the soil fights you, the trees close in, and the deeper you go, the quieter it gets. They call it the Pine Barrens. And for nearly 300 years, something has been said to live there. Something they named the Jersey Devil.
Welcome to the Book of Lore.
Stretching across southern New Jersey, the Pine Barrens cover 1 million acres of dense forest. The soil is sandy, acidic, difficult to farm, which is why, for a long time, the people who live there learned to survive differently. The Jersey Devil, a creature said to live deep within the Pine Barrens, not something people see every day, but something they hear about. Something that moves, just out of reach. Most descriptions are unsettlingly consistent. A winged body, hooves, a long, twisted head, almost like a horse, or something worse. Small, clawed hands, a forked tail, about the size of a dog. But even with all those details, there's one thing no one can seem to agree on. Where it came from. Because depending on who you ask, the story begins in very different ways. The most well-known version starts with a woman, Mother Leeds. By the time this story takes place, she's already had 12 children. 12. So when she finds out she's pregnant again, something in her breaks. Frustrated, exhausted, she curses the child, says, "Let this one be the devil." And when the time comes, the baby is born. At first, everything seems normal, just another child, until it isn't. Because within moments, the baby begins to change. Its body stretches, twists, something unnatural taking hold. Its face hardens, pulling forward into something long, bony, no longer human. Hooves form where feet should be. Wings tear through its back, and before anyone in the room can react, it rises, hovering above the bed. Then a scream. Not human, not anything they'd recognize. The creature lashes out, striking everything around it, even its own mother. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it's gone. Up the chimney and out into the night, into the Pine Barrens. Some versions say that was only the beginning, that its first act was violence against livestock, against families. Others say it turned on its own, the Leeds family itself. But that's only one version, because in other tellings, the details shift. The number of children changes, 6, 8, 10, but most often, 13. And in some stories, the child isn't born and unleashed immediately. Instead, it's hidden, locked away in an attic or cellar, kept out of sight for years, until one night it escapes. And once it does, it never comes back. But even that isn't the only origin. There's another version, one tied more closely to the land itself, to a place called Leeds Point. A quiet, marshy stretch of land where the forest begins to give way to the Atlantic. During the late 1700s, this area became important. Iron production, industry, opportunity, but also conflict. During the American Revolution, the British moved in, trying to take control of the region, and somewhere in the middle of that chaos, another story begins. A girl from Leeds Point falls in love with a British soldier. To the people around her, that wasn't just betrayal, it was something worse. A curse. And when she gives birth, the child that follows isn't seen as human. It's something else. Something they begin to call the Leeds Point Devil. 3 different origins, 3 different versions, but all of them lead to the same place, the same creature, and the same question. What is actually out there? Even though no one could agree on where it came from, people agreed on one thing. Something was out there. For years, anything that went wrong in the region, failed crops, livestock dying, strange sounds in the night, was blamed on it. Not because people had proof, but because they had something worse. Stories. And over time, those stories started to change. Because now, people weren't just hearing about it. They were starting to see it. Even men who weren't easily shaken reported encounters. Commodore Stephen Decatur, while inspecting a munitions site in New Jersey, claimed he saw something moving just above the tree line. Not a bird, not anything he could recognize, and he fired at it. And whatever it was, kept moving. Years later, Joseph Bonaparte reported seeing something similar while hunting on his estate. A shape in the trees, watching, then gone. By the late 1800s, something had changed. The sightings weren't isolated anymore. They were spreading. Farmers reported livestock torn apart, strange tracks appearing in the dirt and in the snow, screams echoing through the woods at night that didn't sound like anything they knew. And it wasn't just the Pine Barrens anymore. Reports began appearing farther out, reaching towns that had never heard the story before. And suddenly, people who didn't believe in it were starting to ask questions. By the time the new century arrived, the legend had grown beyond control. Some believed it was real, others said it would fade away, that it was just another story waiting to be forgotten. But in January of 1909, that changed. Because over the course of 1 week, the Jersey Devil was reported in more than 30 towns. And what happened next is what turned a local legend into something much bigger. The Jersey Devil didn't arrive quietly. By the weekend, it was everywhere. Reports began surfacing across southern New Jersey and into Pennsylvania. Different names, different descriptions, but people quickly realized they were all talking about the same thing. And as the sighting spread, so did the fear. Schools closed, businesses shut their doors, families stayed inside, waiting for it to pass. But it didn't. Late Saturday night in Woodbury, New Jersey, a man named Thad Cousins stepped out into the street and saw it. A pale shape moving fast, eyes glowing in the dark. He described it as something unnatural, something that moved like nothing he'd ever seen before. And then it was gone. But that same night in Bristol, Pennsylvania, things escalated. Around 2 a.m., multiple people woke to the same sound. Scratching, whistling, something moving just outside. One man looked out his window and saw it standing along the canal. Another, a police officer on patrol, came face to face with it in the dark. He ran toward it, fired at it, and it disappeared into the night. By morning, it had crossed back into New Jersey, and that's when people started finding the tracks. Hoofprints everywhere, in yards, on rooftops, across fields, and frozen into the snow. They didn't make sense. They would appear in straight lines, then suddenly stop, jump from roof to ground to fence without any clear path in between, and no one could explain them. By Sunday afternoon, the panic had set in. People weren't just hearing stories anymore. They were seeing the evidence themselves. By Monday morning, the entire region was on edge. Families woke to find their yards covered in tracks, doors checked, windows locked. People stopped going out after dark, and then they started organizing. Search parties, posses, groups of men determined to find and kill whatever was out there. Dogs were brought in to track it, but even they refused, turning away, whimpering, refusing to follow the trail. Farmers set traps, hundreds of them. None worked. Whatever this was, it stayed just out of reach. By Tuesday, the sightings became harder to ignore. In Gloucester County, a man and his wife woke in the middle of the night to something moving on their roof. They watched it for nearly 10 minutes, jumping, moving, almost playing. And when they finally got a clear look, they described something unlike anything they had ever seen. A small, upright creature with wings, hooves, and a head that didn't quite belong to anything. And then it looked back at them, let out a sound, and flew off into the darkness. By Wednesday, the entire region was in chaos. Sightings were being reported everywhere. Police, farmers, workers, even entire groups claiming to see it at the same time. Search parties scoured the woods, following tracks that led nowhere. People chased it, only to lose it moments later. Others claimed to see it perched on rooftops or watching from the trees, and still, no one could catch it. But what made it worse was how far the story had spread. Reports weren't just coming from New Jersey anymore. They were coming from surrounding states, even beyond. What started as a local legend was turning into something much bigger. And the week wasn't over yet. By Thursday, there was no doubt anymore. Whatever was out there wasn't leaving. It was moving. Fast. And it was everywhere. Just after midnight in Camden, New Jersey, a group gathered inside the social club heard something. An unnatural sound. One man turned toward the window and froze. Something was staring back at him, eyes glowing, unnaturally bright. Panic broke instantly. The room emptied, and before anyone could react, it was gone. Not long after, a trolley moving through Haddon Heights was forced to slow. Passengers pressed against the windows, watching as something circled them. Low, fast, close enough to see its shape, but not long enough to understand it. And then it vanished into the dark. By the time it reached Trenton, the encounters weren't brief anymore. They were seeing it clearly. Standing in the road, watching from rooftops, leaving tracks across entire properties. One man described freezing in place, unable to move as it stood just feet away. Then it lifted off and disappeared. Inside homes, people weren't safe either. Residents reported something trying doors, moving along rooftops, scratching at windows. One woman barricaded herself inside, refusing to leave, convinced it would come back. And by morning, something changed. This wasn't just sightings anymore. It was damage. Farmers across the region woke to find livestock dead, chickens missing or lying untouched with no signs of what had killed them. No tracks leading in, no tracks leading out, just silence. For a moment, people thought it was over. Rumors spread that it had been killed, destroyed, but those stories didn't last, because by afternoon, it was seen again. And then it crossed the river into Philadelphia, a city, crowded, busy. Not the kind of place a story like this should survive, but it did. Residents reported seeing it on their own yards, on rooftops, moving through alleys. One man chased it, another tried to fight it off, and still, no one could stop it. In one of the largest sightings of the week, a crowd gathered, watching it move across a rooftop. People threw objects, tried to drive it away, but nothing worked. And then it turned, charging toward them, before lifting off and disappearing into the night. And later that night in Camden, a woman ran outside after hearing something in her yard and found it holding her dog. She fought it off, managed to break its grip, but not before it left its mark. Then it was gone. By the end of that day, the entire region had changed. Streets emptied, homes locked down, and fear took hold. Because this wasn't rumor anymore. This wasn't imagination. This was something people believed they had seen. And for the first time, they didn't know how to stop it. By Friday morning, it was still there. Not gone, not finished, just quieter. Around 2 a.m. in Camden, a woman woke suddenly. Something was above her, heavy, deliberate. She shook her husband awake, and by the time he reached his rifle, it was already moving, gone from the roof and back into the night. Not long after, a police officer in the city claimed to see it clearly, standing near a trough, drinking. He described something unnatural, a body like a kangaroo, horns like a deer, wings stretched wide in the dark. By sunrise, the stories were everywhere. Newspapers carried the events of the night before, spreading them across the Delaware Valley, and life began to change. Schools closed, businesses struggled. People stayed inside, not because they had seen it, but because they believed they might. For most of the day, it stayed out of sight. No sightings, no movement, just the weight of everything that had already happened. Then, as night returned, so did it. Near Chester, Pennsylvania, two women walking along the tracks heard something inside a train car. Before they could react, it burst out, a mass of wings and movement, passing just overhead, before disappearing again into the night. Later that evening, a call spread quickly. It had been captured, locked inside a barn. People gathered, crowds formed, waiting to see it for themselves. But when the doors were opened, there was nothing there. No creature, no sign. Just another moment that couldn't be explained. And as the night wore on, one final sighting came through. A police officer, watching it from a distance, long enough to sketch what he saw. A shape that matched every story told that week. And then, nothing. Just like that, it was gone. And by the end of that week, the question wasn't whether it existed. It was, what had just happened? And just like that, the week ended. No capture, no explanation. Whatever had moved through the Delaware Valley was gone, but not forgotten. A few weeks later, near Salem, a man reported seeing something in the sky. Large, unfamiliar even. He didn't try to explain it. He just called it the devil. And from that point on, everything changed. Before 1909, the Jersey Devil was a story. Something used to scare children. Something whispered about. But after that week, it became something else. A legend. Something people believed they had seen. People tried to explain it. Some said it was an animal, something unknown, or something that didn't belong there. Others believed it was a hoax, a story that had gotten out of control. And some believed it was neither. That what happened that week was something else entirely. And there were those who tried to take advantage of it, turning fear into spectacle, creating creatures, staging captures, and selling the story to anyone willing to believe it. Because by then, the Jersey Devil didn't need to be real. It just needed to feel real. And that's what stayed behind. Not the creature itself, but the idea of it. Something in the woods, something just out of sight, something you can't quite explain, but can't quite ignore either. Even years later, people still report seeing something, hearing something, finding tracks that don't quite make sense, and every time it happens, the same question comes back. What did people really see that week in 1909? As we bring this entry to a close, the truth is, the Jersey Devil can be anything. A creature, a legend, or something created from fear, isolation, and a story told one too many times. But for those who know the Pine Barrens, who walked those trails or stood in that silence, there's always that feeling that something might still be there. So the next time you find yourself in the Pine Barrens, be careful where you look, because something out there may already be looking back. Have a great week. Thanks for listening. New episodes of the Book of Lore release every Tuesday. Please rate, follow, and review. It greatly helps the show. Have any other lovers of lore in your life? Share with your friends, family, and loved ones to help the show become a place for lovers of the spooky, mythical, and creepy to come together. You can follow the show on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at Book of Lore Pod. Have a great week, and thanks for listening.